What's up, Rovers? I'm glad we got this guide out before the patch ended, as my PC broke recently and took us out of commission for a while, but we made it on time to bring Lupa back home with us. That's right, Septimon's #1 gladiator has found a new home away from the Silvas. Is their gameplay as feisty and wild as their tendencies? There's only one way to find out. Let's take a closer look. Today's guide has taken over 50 hours to make. If you found this video helpful, feel free to leave a like or subscribe. As a reminder, full team breakdowns have been moved to a separate video follow-up. This guide will still mention her best teammates and how the teams play, but nuances on gearing and rotations will be saved for the next video. If you want an early peek, Lupa's spreadsheet includes all team rotations, including their easier or harder variants, in the description and pinned. We'll cover Lupa's team role and main mechanics first, then the typical deeper dive. Forte Priorities come after, and then echo stuff. Mainstats, Substats, and I know some of you will be wondering how mandatory Flaming Clawprint is. Don't worry, we'll get there. Then we have weapon comparisons, endgame stat goals, and her sequences breakdown. We'll end with her rotations and a short summary of her team setups. Let's dive right in. Lupa is our undefeated champion of the modern Aegon era in Septimont. This comes with an extensive and highly aggressive ground and aerial moveset through which she channels her love for combat. Her loyalty in protecting the city can also be translated into a plethora of strong team buffs, of which most are restricted to fusion teammates only. While she doesn't mandate using other fusion units with her, not doing so removes the bulk of what makes her kit unique and turns her into a generic, very average sub-DPS. Therefore, all evaluations and team considerations for Lupa today will aim to include at least one other fusion unit to best highlight her strengths. This extends to her signature weapon, being a sufficiently decent upgrade for herself, but really shines in granting the entire team fusion damage buffs. It holds very little value if you have no other fusion units on the team, since Lupa herself does not have the full scaling of a main DPS. Regardless, Lupa is easy to play at a baseline, with most conditional moves also activating from just mashing the basic attack button. Lupa's kit consists of one central gimmick. Her liberation puts her and the entire team in the pack hunt and glory state, granting a fixed amount of fusion damage bonus and fusion res ignore, based off the amount of fusion teammates, and an increasing amount of attack % bonus with each intro casted by the team, similar to Shorekeeper's crit buffs from her ults. Even her dedicated Echo Set's 5-piece, Flaming Clawprint, grants fusion damage bonus to the team as well from casting her ult. Thus, the vast majority of the time, you'll always want to lead with Lupa's Liberation, or right after your healer, to set up all of your big buffs as early as possible. She also has an enhanced intro just like Shorekeeper. If you intro Lupa within 35 seconds of her Liberation, and after 2 intros have already been triggered. This hit is the strongest part of her kit and represents roughly 1/4 of her damage, so you absolutely want to activate it. Otherwise, her kit consists of trying to fill her Concerto as fast as possible. The only moves that actually produce Concerto of note are Liberation and special skill afterwards, and her full Forte skills. Thus, we want to rapidly fill her Forte with basic attacks, which fills 6 times faster, by the way, after you cast her Liberation. Another reason to lead with it. Using Aerial 3 or Ground Heavy when at least half your Forte is full grants 1 Wolfaith icon on your bar. Filling the rest and heavy again gets you your second Wolfaith to cast her Forte. If you fill the entire bar though before you start getting Wolfaith, it lets you get both stacks with a heavy plus basic instead of a double heavy, so it's always preferred to fill your entire Forte first. Remember, your ult gives you 6 times faster Forte generation. Please note that nothing on her kit except her intro, Liberation, and special follow-up skill Foebreaker grant Concerto on cast. Even her normal skills and Forte skills only grant Concerto on hit. This is useful for Quickswap, but means that you cannot outro early easily. Finally, Lupa is generally considered a somewhat poor battery, but this can be fixed by casting her normal skill twice outside of her standard rotation, as it produces a ton of energy itself and isn't part of her typical moveset. So how does Lupa work? As said before, her Liberation is the reason you bring her. It grants the pack hunt and glory buff to the team, increasing everyone's fusion damage bonus and fusion res ignore based off of the amount of fusion teammates present, and an attack % bonus scaling off of each extra intro the team performs. Please note that recasting Lupa's Liberation before she gets her enhanced intro will fully reset Pac-Con to 0 stacks and prevent her enhanced intro from happening. You want to lead with Lupa's Liberation as often as you can to immediately activate these buffs up front, and that's basically it on why you bring her. The rest is just doing her rotation so she can outro and amplify buff the next Resonator with 20% fusion and 25% basic for 14 seconds or until swap off, which is a perfect match for Brant or Encore, among a few other choices. As Lupa's whole shtick is activating her Liberation for team buffs and she cannot cast her enhanced intro until 2 other teammates have already, you might even skip her intro in the first rotation. This is easily solved since her normal rotation already overcaps Concerto, and you can pad it by leading with her normally unused ordinary skill cast. These are useful for battering the team on super fast variants that need to ult more often. Otherwise, both Lupa's aerial and ground combos used to fill her forte can be quick swapped on any move after the first, giving you 2 paths to a simple, non-swap Lupa rotation or extremely complicated looking quick swap teams like this. Her forte move is also extremely slow and quick swap friendly as well. Let's look at her forte priorities next. Your first priority should actually be her second inherent skill. It requires level 70, but that shouldn't take too long these days, even for newer players, as it unlocks her glory buff, granting the team the fusion res ignore when Lupa casts Liberation. Yes, it isn't a part of her base kit, you have to actually unlock it. Liberation is the next priority, but realistically extremely close to her intro and forte circuit, and they have near equal priority. Liberation tree includes both the nuke cast and the follow-up skill Foe Breaker. Intro is, well, her 2 intros, including the enhanced variant, which is considered liberation damage, and Forte Circuit includes both versions of her Forte Nuke, of which you usually only use the Climax variant. It's also considered liberation damage. Normal attack tree is okay, but not great, whereas skill is borderline useless and only used as an energy tool or opener to make up for not having her intro. It also only grants Concerto on hit, so there's very little reason to use it if you have enough ER and teams are rotating fast enough. Still lost on how her Forte Circuit works? No worries, let's dig deeper. Lupa's Forte bar has 2 states, but only 1 bar. Filled segments are called Wolf Flame, whereas segments with a wolf icon over are called Wolf Face. Only filled Wolf Flame segments can become Wolf Faith segments, and only one at a time with either heavy Wolf's Gnawing move or Aerial 3 Fire Strike. While Wolf's Gnawing is somewhat fast, Fire Strike is quite slow and is an excellent aerial quick swap window. It's okay to swap off even with Outro Amplify buffs active because Lupa already deals over 65% of her damage already from just her enhanced intro plus Liberation and then into her follow-up skill Foe Breaker into Aerial 1-2. An even stronger move can be cast called Heavy Wolf's Claw if you already have 1 full faith and the second bar segment is also filled with Wolf Flame. Wolf's Claw can be casted from a simple basic attack input if you just performed Heavy Wolf's Gnawing or Aerial 3 Fire Strike, so it is preferred to fill your entire Wolf Flame bar first to instantly trigger both Wolf Faith stacking moves back to back without needing a clunky second heavy attack input. Wolf's Claw is the second slowest move on her kit, and it's recommended to quick swap off if you need to speed up the team. Quickly filling Lupa's Forte bar requires her Liberation to activate the Burning Match Point state, which multiplies Wolf Flame generation by her basic attacks by 6. There's no way around this. With Burning Match Point active, a simple aerial 1-2 combo, or a ground swap in basic 2-3, is enough to fill all 100 Wolf Flame instantly, letting you queue Fire Strike or Wolf's Gnawing, and then into Wolf's Claw. With 2 Wolf Faiths, you can cast Dance with the Wolf both on the ground or in the air. If you're still in Burning Match Point state, which lasts for 12 seconds after her Liberation, you can cast the Climax variant instead, which has identical animation and does slightly more damage, but produces double Concerto. Therefore, always strive to cast Dance with the Wolf with Burning Match Point active. This is by far the slowest move to cast on Lupa's kit, taking nearly 2 full seconds to deal backloaded damage, and a 2.5 second animation lock. It's also weaker than her Liberation or her enhanced intro. Again, it is recommended to quick swap off during this cast if you can speed up the team. Please note that all Concerto from this move is produced on hit and not on cast, so missing hits may make her unable to outro. Finally, casting her Forte grants her the Set the Arena Ablaze status, which will cast the corresponding move once the next time someone on your team casts a Liberation. This status is granted at the very start of her Forte, Dance with the Wolf skill, and will cancel her Forte skill to cast to set the arena ablaze if you cast Liberation on another unit while her Forte is still casting. Thus, always wait for her Forte to complete before casting another Liberation, because her Forte is 60% backloaded to the final AoE hit. Lupa's Liberation is the bread and butter of her kit, castable on both ground and in air. By default, it grants 3 auto dodges to your team when they're hit or launched in the air. You will immediately interrupt your action to perform a perfect dodge. And if I'm gonna be honest, I absolutely hate this part of your passive, because even moves that would not normally break your poison stagger you, for example, hits that you want to brute force through to continue your rotation, those moves will now also trigger this passive. It can cause a lot of issues in Quickswap teams interrupting movesets while also granting you concerto you may not want from the perfect dodge. Quickswap teams with Lupa require increased care when designing rotations as a result to account for the possibility of unwanted extra concerto or better protecting high priority moves so they don't get cancelled. Personally, I would have preferred if the passive worked more like Shorekeeper's outro, where after you get interrupted or launched, you can intentionally dodge to automatically recover. Otherwise, Lupa's Liberation also grants the Pack Hunt buff, plus 10% fusion to the team, plus 20% instead if there are 3 fusion resonators on the team, and plus 6% attack with an extra 6 per intro performed up to a total of 18 overall. And if you have her second inherent skill, you will now also proc Glory on casting Liberation, which grants 3% fusion res ignored to the team per fusion resonator present. At 3, you get 9%, and also an extra 6 slapped on top for an overall 15% res ignore. In practice, that full 15% fusion res ignore is worth somewhere between 15 to 19% increase in most situations. A solid bump and reason to run triple fusion, but not so big a difference that duo fusion isn't good enough. But versus no other fusion teammates? This is the reason why I don't recommend slapping Lupa in just a random team. Foe Breaker is also a part of this tree, and is the follow-up skill only available the first 2 seconds after you cast your Liberation. It can be queued by both mashing skill or basic attack. I personally recommend mashing basic, as the rest of her aerial combo chain, Fire Strike, and Wolf's Claw are also queued by basic attack. Additionally, mashing basic ensures you won't auto-queue a skill cast accidentally on Quickswap. There are situations where mashing skill Foe Breaker until the exact moment it casts and then swapping will auto-input the next resonator skill, even though there's a clear forced delay after casting Foe Breaker before he can swap off. This delay is attributed to a forced 1-second non-swap window after casting Lupa's Liberation, similar to what Cardathia had. Not casting Foe Breaker afterwards will instead leave Lupa on the ground, whereas casting Foe Breaker will leave Lupa in the air. You always want to cast Foe Breaker because this is what allows her to enter burning match point state for better Forte generation. Swapping off and back to Lupa after Foe Breaker will usually spawn her on the ground because she despawns too quickly, except if you use Liberation to reset cooldowns like here. You can always just jump back in the air with Lupa too, as it's super fast and she always begins from aerial 1 when you swap her in anyways. Lupa's Resonance skill is mainly used as a battery tool for energy, or substitute her intro in the first rotation for Concerto. Castable on both ground and air, it is a 2-part skill cast where you lose access to the second if you swap off, or don't use it within 8 seconds of the first skill. She-Wolf's Hunt begins on the ground and quickly rises into an aerial attack, whereas Feral Fang starts an aerial attack and ends on the ground. They can be used to funnel Concerto or energy while simultaneously forcing an aerial or ground quickswap window. She-Wolf marks enemies it hits, making Feral Fang deal 50% extra damage to them. Killing enemies marked by her skill will reset its cooldown. Basic attacking after the first skill will skip her into Aerial 1 instead. It's still faster to jump into Aerial 1 though if speed matters. Now, Lupa's normal attack tree includes all her ground and aerial spam combos, including her Wolf-Faith producing moves, Fire Strike, Wolf's Gnawing, and Wolf's Claw. All of these moves produce Wolf Flame, whereas the aforementioned moves burn 1 full segment of Wolf Flame to convert into Wolf-Faith. Fire Strike replaces Aerial 3 when you have at least 1 full Wolf Flame segment. Wolf's Gnawing replaces Standard Heavy when you have at least 1 full Wolf Flame segment, and Wolf Claw replaces Standard Heavy when you have at least 1 Wolf-Faith already and another full Wolf Flame segment, and can be casted by simple basic input if you just casted Wolf's Gnawing or Fire Strike. None of Lupa's normal attack tree moves produce good Concerto except the Wolf-Faith producing moves and basic 3-4 on the ground. Lupa's ordinary heavy attack is useless. Lupa's ground attacks are mostly a spin combo with spear half swings. Swapping into Lupa on the ground when fully despawned will always start from basic 2. Basic 3 and 4 are amazing quick swap windows, but be aware that casting basic 4 too late will actually trigger Lupa's white flash and make her jump up to perform aerial 1 instead. Swapping into Lupa in the air when fully despawned will always start from aerial 1. Aerial 2 and 3 or Fire Strike are also really good quick swap windows, but the quick swap window in Aerial 2 is quite tight. The move only takes 54 frames or 0.9 seconds, which is shorter than the 1 second default swap cooldown. However, it takes an extra half second until she despawns from the air, so the full quick swap window for Aerial 2 is actually about 1.4 seconds. Doing a standard plunge instead of Aerial 3 requires using Aerial Heavy Attack and makes a weak AoE, which serves no practical purpose, so don't do this. A basic attack immediately after landing plunge will trigger Starfall, which is moderately hard and is quick swap friendly. Running for 2.5 seconds will trigger Lupa's passive for a faster sprint, and basic attacking in this state automatically casts Starfall too. Lupa can only perform dodge counters on the ground, and these are basically stronger Starfall casts, which will skip to basic 2 afterwards. Lupa has 2 sets of intros, one for when Pack Hunt, which lasts 35 seconds, isn't fully charged, and one for when Pack Hunt maxes out from 2 casted intros, allowing Lupa to enter the Wild Hunt state. Note that recasting Liberation before Enhanced Intro will reset Pack Hunt stacks. Besides the opener, Lupa should always be using her Enhanced Intro. It makes up over 1/4 of her total damage output, and it is a massive damage loss to not cast it. It is over 5 times stronger than a normal intro, has time stop for the first half of its animation, and is classified as liberation damage for buff purposes. Casting Enhanced Intro will also end the Wild Hunt state and remove Pack Hunt and Glory buff effects. Usually, you immediately recast Liberation after Enhanced Intro, so this isn't really a problem. Normal Intro puts her in the air for Aerial 1, whereas Enhanced Intro puts her on the ground. None of this should matter if you cast Liberation right after, which is castable both on ground or in air. Lupa has unusually good targeting on Enhanced Intro and is an extremely reliable tool for repositioning. Lupa's outro is super simple, amplifying the next Resonator's fusion damage by 20% and basic by 25% for the next 14 seconds or until they swap off. Pretty typical. For inherent skill, her first one doesn't really matter that much. It's what grants her access to her sprint passive, a slightly faster run after 2.5 seconds. It also replaces her basic with Starfall once sprint begins. Nice for overworld I guess, but doesn't change much. It grants her partial hyper armor too for Wolf's Gnawing, Wolf's Claw, and Fire Strike, which are her Wolf Faith producing moves. You don't really have to worry about this, as Wolf Faith is granted at the immediate start of these moves rather than end. In my own experience, you won't really care. You'll get this inherent skill anyways, because her second one is actually important. It makes kills on marked targets reset the cooldown of skill she will hunt, but more importantly, it makes her Liberation grant the team the Glory buff, granting you 3% Fusion Res Ignore per Fusion Resonator on the team. An extra 6% for a total of 15 Res Ignore is granted if you play Triple Fusion. This alone ranges from a 15 to 19% team DPS increase overall, and it's extremely important since it affects the whole team. Echo set discussion time? There's very little to say here. Use Flaming Clawprint if you can. It's roughly the same in buffing Lupa's personal damage, being 25% fusion and 20% liberation for herself. On a unit that deals 70% of her damage as Liberation type, this can be normalized as a general 39% fusion bonus from the 2-piece and 5-piece set, which is basically identical to Molten Rift. But what you're missing is 1. The plus 15% fusion damage team buff for 35 seconds Flaming Clawprint's 5-piece provides when Lupa casts Liberation, and 2. The 4 cost of the set, Lioness of Glory, is an AoE auto-target summon, which does not slow down Lupa's rotation, like the transformative Inferno Rider variants do. This leads to both higher team damage and faster Lupa rotations, and should always be the main choice. Thus, while Molten Rift has near identical DPR, the time loss in transformation results in a 5% personal DPS loss, and the lack of the 15% fusion team buff is a roughly 5% overall team DPS loss, aka the entire team deals 6 to 8% less DPS if you put Lupa on Molten Rift. Now, as Lupa brings both fusion percent and attack percent buffs in her kit to the table, diluting both stats, there's not that much a difference between fusion and fusion attack on 3 costs for herself. being less than a 1% difference regardless of the 5-star weapon you use so long as it is a crit stick, aka not Lustrous Razor. It's still only a 2 to 4% DPS loss on all other weapons if you go fusion attack versus fusion. This means both builds are viable paths and you can pick the one with better substats. Double attack is also quite viable, specifically on any 5-star Broadblade that isn't Lustrous Razor, being only a 2 to 4% overall personal DPS loss, which is equal to a single substat missing on the entire build. But I wouldn't recommend double attack on Lustrous Razor itself or any other 4-star or 3-star Broadblades. Now, for fusion teammates though, note that Lupa brings an extra 10 to 20% fusion from her kit and another 15% fusion from Flaming Clawprint, but only 6 to 8% attack depending on the number of intros casted. This means she dilutes her team's damage percent a lot more than attack percent. So you might be wondering, should you shift Changli Chixia or Encore to double attack, or Brant to double ER? Well, the answer is no, you don't have to. While Lupa's buffs do dilute main stats on her teammates, it literally only shifts the post 2 to 3% in favor of attack, or in the case of Brant's, ER. AKA, instead of being, say, 1% worse, it's now 1 to 2% better. Or say with a signature build where you had fusion attack be 1% better, it would now only be 3 to 4% better than, say, double fusion, and double attack would probably be just as good as double fusion now. It's really not worth refarming if you already have fully completed builds for your teammates because, as I said, it doesn't move the goalpost enough. It's only 2 to 3%. For substats in general, crit is best always. Attack percent is next as expected. Because Lupa's 70% liberation scaling, then liberation percent is better than attack flat on her, as it passes the 60% threshold to be clearly superior. ER gets a little bit complicated, as Lupa is not a good battery in her standard rotation, casting very low energy producing moves except her full Forte skill. Therefore, the standard recommendations is 115 to 120 ER in teams that include Brant because he produces more energy than normal. In teams without Brant, you want to add an extra 10 ER, so 125 to 130 on Lupa, since you will lack a good battery to counteract her lower production. But remember, she also has a tool to counter this problem. Her normal skills, She-Wolf's Hunt and Feral Fang, the ones you don't use in a standard rotation. Now you can quickswap these in somewhere and they produce a massive amount of energy. Casting these two skills reduces her ER requirements by 10 to 15. So if you don't have Brant on the team, but you're willing to cast this, she'll only need about 110 to 120 ER. Now it's time to consider Lupa's weapon options. The following weapon chart is calculated with 2 ER substat rolls. Let's start with her signature, Wildfire Mark. Because Lupa's signature buffs the entire team's fusion damage, the more fusion units you want to run on the team, the more valuable her signature becomes. If you mix and match your Lupa a lot and don't care about triple fusion to maximize buffs, her signature has limited value, and is only lightly recommended. But in triple fusion, her signature makes a bigger difference. It buffs her own DPS by about 20%, and then the entire team by a roughly further 8% overall. Somewhat behind the DPS increase you'd expect from pulling a MainDPS signature weapon versus pulling her signature for triple fusion. For perspective, it's slightly worse than Chacona's signature weapon for a full arrow team. Note that Lupa cannot be played in a main DPS capacity properly as she lacks good ways to efficiently extend her rotation. All of her big moves are locked away behind timers or slow to build, like her Forte, which is something Chacona would have no problems with, and even if you do build Lupa's Forte, it makes up less than 1/4 of her damage output, unlike Brant. Now, alternative 5-star options include Ages of Harvest and Verdant Summit. Jichi's signature parses higher by virtue that more of Lupa's damage is skill damage, being Foe Breaker, and her off-field Set the Arena Blaze move. However, it makes up less than 1/8 of her total damage output only, meaning Ages of Harvest R1 only parses 5 to 6% above Lustrous Razor. Verdant Summit is even worse off because the only heavy type moves on Lupa's rotation are Fire Strike and Wolf's Claw, one of which is extremely weak and the other one has only okay scaling. This makes Verdant Summit parse only 3 to 4% above Lustrous Razor. Keep in mind Razor's ER passes allows us to convert one of the 2 ER substats back into an attack percent substat. For 4-star weapons, Autumn Trace holds a steady lead at R5 purely due to being the only 4-star crit stick, because its passive buffs basic and heavy damage, which makes up a very small part of Lupa's output. Even though Battle Pass weapons have abnormally high scaling on their passives at R5, we get very limited use out of it. This makes R5 Autumn Trace barely better than the next best option. If your Autumn Trace is only R1, it's still decent by virtue of being a crit main stat, but I would recommend using Lustrous Razor instead. Otherwise, R5 Waning Redshift is the next best option because it grants easily accessible attack percent buffs and extra ult energy. And off energy at R5, you can actually drop one ER substat for another attack substat, just like Lustrous Razor. Thus, it stands above all other 4-star Broadblades except Autumn Trace. For other generic 4-stars, we have Helios Cleaver, which also grants attack percent, but no ult energy, and Meditations on Mercy, the craftable Broadblade, but unfortunately, the marked status from Lupa skill, She-Wolf's Hunt, is not considered a negative status and cannot activate the attack passive on Meditations on Mercy. For 3-star Broadblades, you got Broadblade of Night and Guardian Broadblade. One grants attack percent, and the other grants basic plus heavy. Because Lupa barely deals basic or heavy damage, then the attack percent passive one is better, being Broadblade of Night. No other weapons should be considered on Lupa. Now, if you manage to achieve all that we've discussed so far, then our endgame substats before any buffs should look a little bit like this. Do keep in mind these are scaled to level 90 with maxed out Forte, so it can take some time to reach this. Lupa's sequences might seem a bit weak on the surface, but this is because they primarily focus on splitting between buffing herself and buffing the team. In practice, they're significantly stronger team DPS-wise than Changli's sequences and stronger than any other fusion sequence, except Brant's. Therefore, it is advised to consider Lupa's sequences before Changli's sequences, and should also be considered when deciding on whether you want Lupa or Brant sequences first. Her S2 and S3 are significant jumps for the team, but change value depending on how many fusion resonators you bring along. For MainDPS Lupa, it does not require S6 and can already be done by S2 or S3 quite well, it just feels awkward. S6 is mainly for comfort and easier access to her harder hitting moves. All values are quoted in vacuum and may be valued differently for full team comp rotations, which will be discussed. Main stopping points are S2, S3, and S6. Lupa's first sequence grants full hyper armor to, surprise surprise, her full Forte cast, Dance with the Wolf, and the Climax variant. Now, if you didn't know, her base kit has absolutely zero hyper armor on this move, which is super annoying. It also makes her Liberation grant an additional 10 Concerto and 20% crit rate for 10 seconds. Useful for setting up early outros so you don't have to wait out her Dance with the Wolf animation, but it also prevents you from doing another cancel tech while retaining fully buffed damage if you don't want to outro yet. I'll go over that in the rotation section. S1 is mainly quality of life sequence, charting only 11% improvement over S0. S2 basically grants a permanent 20% fusion damage bonus to the team, stacking up to twice each time you cast her Liberation, or a Wolf Faith producing move. Plus 40% damage bonus is the standard for all new generation sub DPSs providing to the team, so you should already have a good idea on how strong this is. While it is only a 16% DPS increase for herself over S1 and 1.28 times as strong as S0, Lupa is already incentivized to pair with fusion resonators due to her pack on passive, so it's extremely likely her teammates will also benefit from the total plus 40% fusion damage bonus. The resulting impact of this sequence is larger than stated in this table and scales up by the number of fusion resonators on the team. Now, her S3 doubles her enhanced intro's motion values, which is already your strongest move in kit, but since her Liberation and Forte trees also have similar scaling, this buffed intro still only represents a 24% increase over S2 and 1.6 times as strong as S0. More importantly, it removes the pack hunt and glory restrictions that scale their buffs by the number of fusion resonators on the team. They will permanently give max buffs, being 20% fusion bonus and 15% fusion res ignore, regardless of fusion resonator count. In triple fusion team, this does absolutely nothing, since you'd already be getting the full bonus, but it's a notable boost in dual fusion, which is normally granted only 10% fusion and 6% fusion res ignore by pack hunt and glory passives. It would represent an additional overall 10 to 12% team damage increase on top of the personal 1.6 times as strong as S0 I stated earlier. S4 is a simple plus 125% multiplicative motion value buff to Lupa's Forte Climax variant, which is only slightly weaker than her Liberation and enhanced intro. This leads to a moderate 22% increase over S3 and 1.94 times as strong as S0. S5 is our typical barely useful 15% Liberation bonus granted to Lupa on an intro for 10 seconds. Just a 4% increase over S4 or 2.02 times as strong as S0. S6 grants Lupa 30% defense ignore on her Enhanced Intro, Liberation, and Forte Climax variants. It also allows her to cast Forte Climax variant even outside of the burning match point state, and casting her normal skill Feral Fang now grants a full Forte bar on hit once every 20 seconds, which is, fast enough, letting her reliably cast 2 Fortes quickly. Amazing for main DPS, but not mandatory for main DPS to function. Her Enhanced Intro now also no longer removes pack content glory buffs, letting you maintain the Fusion and Fusion Res ignore buffs forever, without needing to recast Liberation to activate them. Personally, that last bit is kind of irrelevant, as you generally recast her Liberation immediately after recasting Enhanced Intro anyways. Yes, I know resetting buffs drops your 18% attack buff down to 6, but that's basically nothing. S6 is an 18% increase over S5 and 2.37 times as strong as S0. It's time to go over Lupa's rotations. She has 3 main options. There's the standard Enhanced Intro rotation, the battery rotation, which is literally the exact same, except you swap off before her Forte completes and later come back to cast her skill twice to battery the team before you outro, and the non-intro variant, which is, once again, the same rotation as the original except you open with skill to replace the missing concerto of not having intro. Let's take a closer look. The standard Enhanced Intro is what you will learn first and what most people play. A looped rotation should always begin with their Enhanced Intro for big damage and concerto. Then you immediately cast your Liberation to regain the pack content glory buffs, spam basic attacks to cast Foe Breaker, and go through your entire aerial plus Fire Strike combo. Even Wolf's Claw will trigger from spamming basics after Fire Strike lands. Once your skill turns orange, cast it to trigger Dance with the Wolf Climax and outro when it completes the final hit. It takes roughly 7.75 seconds until the final hit frame of Climax connects for outro. The next rotation variant is the Quickswap Enhanced Intro with the delayed outro. It's near identical to the first with 2 twists. First, you now have the option to, but not required to, dodge cancel Wolf's Claw as soon as it starts because the second Wolf Faith is granted on cast and not on hit. This lets you skip ahead early to dance with a Wolf Climax, focusing on the higher damage move and also speeding up Lupa's rotation. You can either stay on for Climax if you want to preserve an outro amplify buff like Changli's, or you can swap off immediately to set up a different character. When the time is right, you can bring Lupa back in to cast She-Wolf's Hunt to finish your concerto and outro. Feral Fang can also be casted to battery the team here. You can further shorten this rotation by swap cancelling after Foe Breaker if you want an aerial swap in, like with Brant or Changli. This is okay because casting Enhanced Intro plus Liberation plus Foe Breaker is already 60% of Lupa's total damage output, so dropping Amplify outro buffs here is not a big issue, and access to quick swap windows for the rest of her rotation to speed up the team can more than make up for the damage loss. Fire Strike is also a really good quick swap window, because it takes over 1.1 seconds to cast and has an additional time before she despawns afterwards, giving you roughly 1.6 seconds to quick swap and make it back to her in basic attack to cast Wolf's Claw for second Wolf Faith. If you're really ballsy, Aerial 2 can also be quick swapped, but the window for this is barely over 1 second, making the window very tight as swap cooldowns are exactly 1 second. You can see me taking advantage of all swaps in this rotation here. Now the final rotation variant is only used in opener rotations where Lupa received no intro. You simply replace her intro with the standard skill cast She-Wolf's Hunt. It's more than enough to cover her intro's concerto because her Forte normally overcaps her outro. You can take advantage of all swap windows here because no outro amplify restrictions apply on the opener rotation to her. Thus, quick swapping Foe Breaker and Fire Strike and even her Forte casts are super common. You do not want to dodge cancel Wolf's Claw in this opener as you barely produce enough concerto to outro without her intro. If you're feeling ballsy, you can also quick swap her Aerial 2 like I said earlier, but again, I didn't include it as it's only used in the sweatiest setups. On the topic of main DPS Lupa, it doesn't really have a clear obvious way to work. You just simply fill her Forte twice, casting Liberation after Enhanced Intro removes all Wolf Faith, and Foe Breaker grants 100 Wolf Flame, forcing you to do a rotation to get your Wolf Faith back. And doing your entire Forte rotation before casting Liberation loses damage because casting Enhanced Intro drops your Glory and Pack Hunt buffs. Thus, the best option is to set up some Forte at the same time as your supports before you give her Enhanced Intro. Then finish building her Forte bar and cast her Forte before casting Liberation, and then doing the standard rotation. At S6, we still prepare her Forte in advance to speed up rotations. This is also useful to minimize time after intro, since for example, Changli's outro buff only lasts 10 seconds. Spreadsheets, skill times 2 Quickswap, then Quickswap Wolf's Gnawing and Wolf's Claw, then intro her. Immediately Forte Climax into Liberation Cancel, then do the rest of her rotation. Note that MainDPS Lupa is far less effective than MainDPS Brant, as her Forte only makes up 1/4 of her damage, whereas it makes up half of Brant's output. As a reminder, the in-depth version of Lupa's team building will be in a separate video, since it takes an enormous amount of time to get team data and rotations done. If you want an early peek, I've already refined all her team rotations, including the easier variants in the spreadsheet. If you're going to run a healer instead of triple fusion or triple DPS, Shorekeeper will always be better than Verena, except in the Lupa Changli healer variant. This is because all Lupa teams except this one take about 25 seconds to perform regardless, which nullifies Verena's speed advantage, and generally Lupa teams do not need double intro, except Brant MainDPS, of which you can skip Shorekeeper's enhanced intro in that team anyway, since Lupa's enhanced intro is significantly higher damage. Please note that because Lupa's rotation is not short, even with quick swaps, trying to maintain Lupa teams within 25-second rotations typically demands minor to extensive quick swap in every single team variant. For a full breakdown on the non-swap and quick swap variants of respective teams shown today, please refer to Lupa's full team rotations in the sheets. Now Mortefi will not be included here, because including him results in a team weaker than the 9 shown. Teams will be listed in order of strength. Now the main premium team you will see is Triple Fusion, Changli, Lupa, Brant. This team has 3 variants: the standard non-swap, which takes nearly 30 seconds to perform, the quick swap, which cuts it down to just 23, and the super sweaty quick swap 2x Anchor Brant variation, which takes about 28 seconds to do, and probably one of the most difficult rotations I've tried so far. The 2x Anchor variant is not really worth unless your Brant is built extremely well, preferably with signature, because you basically drop outro buffs from each unit right after they do their biggest hits so that Brant can start swapping in to set up his Forte bar twice. So if your Brant isn't strong enough to make up for the dropped outros, you're wasting most of the advantages of the 2x Anchor Brant variation. The main strength of this team lies in Triple Fusion fully enabling Lupa's Pack Taunt and Glory buffs, which will apply to all 3 Resonators on the team, while also utilizing the outros of each Resonator to buff the biggest hits of the next. Changli's outro amplifies Lupa's Fusion and Liberation damage. Lupa's outro amplifies Brant's Fusion and basic damage, while Brant's outro amplifies Changli's Fusion and skill damage. Now, the next team is the premium version of Sanha Brant MainDPS, being Healer Lupa Brant, and it's the second strongest Lupa team, where we focus on using a basic damage amplify outro to buff 2 Brant anchors per rotation. The main difference versus the Sanhwa variant is Lupa's much longer personal rotation. This necessitates extensive amounts of quick swap to maintain the same speed as the Sanhwa version, while granting Brant extra outro buffs and taking advantage of the aerial gameplay and long Lupa animations to squeeze extra Shorekeeper dive bombs and basic chains to keep team times down. This also works well with Verena, where it's actually very similar to the Sanhwa variant, except you mix Lupa's aerial combo inside of Brant's prep rotation top half. We skip on Shorekeeper's enhanced intro in this team in favor of Lupa's much stronger enhanced intro. The missing Concerto on Shorekeeper is made up with basic attack quick swap during Lupa's long animations, which means this is a somewhat difficult team. Now, the premium Encore DPS team in third is quite difficult to play because Encore demands 10 seconds of uninterrupted field time during her liberation. This can be solved by weaving most of Changli's rotation inside of Lupa's setup to DPS with Encore as the second unit on the team, and then ending with Changli ensures that we can reset the team with outro to amplify into Lupa and get her enhanced intro and liberations off, while resetting her pack hunt and glory buffs in time for Changli to squeeze her liberation and second flaming sacrifice off. Unfortunately, because of how slow Changli is without quick swap and Encore demanding 10 seconds of uninterrupted field time, there is no good non-swap version of this team, and it really only exists in its quick swap variant. You'll lose roughly 7 seconds if you go the non-swap route, which is such a big DPS loss that the team becomes not even worth playing. Literally, the Sanhwa version would be stronger. Now, if you only have Changli and Lupa, and you don't want to pair another fusion unit with them, they can be used together with a healer. However, Changli and Lupa do not have any way to extend their rotation for good DPS like Brant can, which means the only way to crank up this team's DPS is to go extremely fast to take advantage of their 20 seconds liberation cooldowns. This insane speed of this team makes Shorekeeper a poor choice over Verena, which does not need her liberation to rotate, and can still get full buffs up, whereas Shorekeeper's performance suffers drastically. If your Verena is S2, it is possible to maintain a 19 seconds rotation instead, but before S2, every other rotation on this team without liberation will take 21 seconds instead. This team is forced to rotate fast to be competitive, so unfortunately there is no non-swap casual friendly variant. If you play it non-swap, you're better off running Shorekeeper and the DPS will be highly questionable still. Now the next team, Brant, Lupa, Chixia, is a more forgiving, easier to play variant of Triple Fusion Encore. Chixia requires far less dedicated field time, only 8 seconds, and can cast Echo right before outro since she has no channeled action. At the end of her rotation, it only needs to tap her skill out of rotations to set up, versus Encore needing 10 seconds, cannot cast Echo before outro because she's either channeling normal skill or Forte, and needs to both tap cast skill and come back to her skill end out of rotation to set up. While the Quickswap for the other two teammates, Brant and Lupa, remains somewhat difficult, the team only takes 23 seconds to rotate, giving you a few seconds of breathing room even if you make mistakes. Lupa outros into Brant to outro into Chixia in this team. The only drawback is Chixia being somewhat weaker than Encore but has range advantage. The Brant variant of the Encore Triple Fusion team is weaker than the Changli variant, since Lupa can only buff Brant to Anchor itself and no one buffs Lupa in this team. However, it is slightly easier to play since Brant has shorter rotations than Changli. This also makes the teams rotate slightly faster and lets you skip catching Encore skill end for energy if you have enough ER, since Brant is a better battery for the team unlike Changli. Regardless, a fair amount of Quickswap is still required to fit this team within 25 seconds. Unlike the Changli variant, a non-swap version is actually possible without completely breaking team DPS, but is still noticeably weaker. Now, by far the easiest Lupa Encore variant to play, the Healer Lupa Encore Dual Fusion comp is the weakest version of it. This is due to Lupa's incomplete buff stacks and losing the raw damage of a third sub DPS fusion. However, this is still an extremely strong team as is, being somewhat stronger than Encore Sanwa variants of the same type. We're once again skipping Shorekeeper's enhanced intro in favor of Lupa since it deals so much damage. Pat the missing Concerto with basic attack Quickswap during Lupa's long animations. Squeezing in aerial Quickswaps or Shorekeeper will substitute using her heavy attacks to dump her Forte. The second last team is a weaker version of Brant, Lupa, Chixia. This is because Chixia actually deals more damage than Lupa in this kind of team, and Brant is a better buffer for Chixia, who is primarily skill damage scaling than Changli or Lupa. Not only do we end up with a slower team because of Changli, but Quickswaps become more complicated and we have a less optimal distribution of buffs. This is still a strong team by virtue of being Triple Fusion and Changli Lupa being strong in their own right. Now the last team, Healer Lupa Chixia, is the weakest version of still meta Lupa teams. You basically remove the sub DPS damage of a third unit, while also preventing Lupa's full kit buffs from activating, while also using the weakest fusion main DPS if you could choose. Viable and quick, fast-paced and comfy to play with much less quickswaps needed, but just know you'll need a really well-built Chixia if you want to clear with this in endgame content. And thank you so much for watching through this entire video. I hope this Lupa guide has been useful for deciding whether or not to pull in her banner. As a reminder, all spreadsheets documenting my testing can be found in the description and pinned comment. Do feel free to make a copy if you want to change and test stuff. Cheers! As it's your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Stick around if you want to see interesting videos. You don't want to miss on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this one. Thank you all for watching and I'll see you all next time.